a newborn is born, everybody thinks they are just going to thrive, you just need to feed them, which is not true. The cells need to be nurtured. We just talked about 100 billion cells eager to form an internal wiring. And then for the first time parents and the parents again also, it is a challenge because no newborn is alike, no two brains are alike, no behavior is alike. They must have read a lot of books and they confuse the parents, then find an answer because the practical experience is a little bit different than what they read from the books or the information obtained from the books. There are concerns about sleep patterns, hiccups, sneezing, colic, pain, stools, feeding, breastfeeding, bottle feeding, color of the stools, so many things, so many questions that only their own personal experience can answer, and by the time my parents and the infants adapt to each other to survive in their proximal environment, it takes about 8 to 10 weeks. So, no baby is pre-born with a genetic frame, although it controls about 50% of the blueprint. Bad genes cannot be expressed, need not be expressed unless the environment promotes it. Good genes will not be expressed unless environment enriches the good genes. From eating habits to complete personality development that is biosocially adaptive is in the hands of the first teachers who are the parents. Let us take for instance sneezing. All infants sneeze, they are getting colonized with the cells, mastocytes, histiocytes that releases chemicals that irritates the nerve endings in the nose and they sneeze. Sneezing does not mean cold because these infants are protected with the passive maternal antibodies in the first 6 months of life. If the mother suffers with a viral infection, the infants will pick it up, otherwise they are protected. They are not protected from bacterial infections that they can get from the adults passing it on to them. So, extreme hygiene and precautions, sanitizers are very, very important. Babies hiccup a lot, they reflux a lot. 85% of the infants have reflux, where the stomach juices flow back into the esophagus or to the food pipe to the throat, and by bouncing them it gets worse. And after every feeding, babies do hiccup because the diaphragm goes into a spasm. Parents should not worry about these also. As I mentioned earlier, the anxiety for the parents comes from an expected behavior from the newborn, whereas the normal newborn behavior is different from their expectations. If parents adapt to live with the newborn, try to understand their needs, then there is no stress and the infant will learn how to adapt to the proximal environment. Bowel movements are very common after every feed and it is called gastrocolic reflex. It is not from any diarrhea or any infection. Infants were fed through the mother's blood, they come out and then they have to feed for themselves, they have to fend for themselves, they have to maintain the body temperature. This is called physical and chemical adaptation. It does take 8 to 10 weeks, but reflexive behavior and learning to survive outside the womb does take longer. That is when most of the parents who started off with the breastfeeding, which is excellent for every newborn because it has right amount of fat, proteins, sugar, immune properties, immune protection, copro antibodies, stem cells, everything is superb from the mother's breast milk. Poverty has nothing to do with the breast milk because in spite of poverty, in countries like India, infants do very well as long as they are breastfed. Breast milk does take time. Every human being is not a mommy cow. It is very few fortunate families where the hormones work right, so the infant does suckle and produce breast milk. It takes 21 days for the infant to get enough to sleep 2 to 3 hours and then be content. Otherwise, it goes with the cluster feeding, demand feeding, and mother has to really offer the foremilk and hind milk by offering both the breasts for each time, longer on the time where they left off, shorter on the time where they started. When they switch, so that is left out with the hind milk for the next feeding. If this is not followed, parents do tend to dry out. If there is a lot of tension in the family, if the nutrition is not proper, and there are certain herbs that can be offered like drumstick leaves, suran, that is a vegetable that is available at Indian stores, quinoa, spinach, kale, all these help the breastfeeding. Wiping has to be with the water and dab with a cloth. Sleep has a circadian rhythm. Infants do not know how to sleep longer at night and wake up during the daytime as expected by the parents. They go through their basic needs every 2 to 3 hours. They are hungry and they need to be fed, and it is very tiring for the parents. And therefore, parents need to understand infants do take 8 to 10 weeks to develop that circadian rhythm. Until that time, parents need to rest, and if they are exhausted, call a nanny or call a grandmother to help them, and try to cut down the noises. This touch therapy, body to body holding, classical music, soothing sounds from within the family, all this calm down the infants. Mothers may have to take care of certain precautions by not eating certain foods that can cramp up the baby. Egg whites are one, casein, gluten, soy, peanuts, corn can cause this colicky pain in the baby or gas production. But the usual run of the mill colic where people offer gripe water or colic drops is not true colic. Baby came from a warm saline, feeling the scent of the parent. They do cry as a means of communication, and they need to be held when they cry. And this is not going to spoil them in the first 6 months of life when they do not recognize the primary caretaker as a love object, and they cry deliberately at that time. Crying is not pain in the infants, and it is a means of communication. Crying is a communication in the baby. By the time the mother figures out this cry is for diaper change, this cry is for exhaustion, this cry is for hunger, it will be 10 weeks between the mother and the infant get to know each other. Therefore, colic drops have no place, but if that baby is taken into a dark quiet room, soothing music, nature sounds, waterfalls, critters, or even chirping birds, and gently rubbing the back and keeping the room quiet with the soothing music. Infants do not need lots of lotions and massaging. They just need a gentle touch therapy. They really don't need powders on their skin, because the powders do irritate the skin and they are picked up by the lungs and cause lung and talc sensitivity disorder. They need a nice gentle soap, rinsing, and maybe plain Vaseline petrolatum jelly. That's enough. Powders are not needed in the baby to make them smell good. They need tender loving care through touch therapy, mother's eye contact, and music and exercises. And these are the normal newborn behaviors that cause panic in the parents. Another caution is not to sleep with the baby. A little hand on the nose for a few seconds is enough to take the life away. And in the deep sleep, parents can roll over the baby. There has to be a guard, the infant and the parent, no co-sleeping. A little bassinet, a little crib is important to separate the primary caretaker or the mother from the infant. This can cause a trauma and I had to witness a couple of those, and it is not very healthy. I hope these tips will help. Brain is connecting very actively. Please provide the eye contact, the touch therapy. I am going to go into detail when I talk about the 2 to 6 month development, how to nurture these nerve cells, but the adaptation in the first 2 weeks to 8 weeks is very, very important. Infants do sleep 20 hours during that time. Thank you.